Good morning or afternoon or maybe even evening to you all, and thank you for joining us for this first this year of a series of CHME webinars. CHME is the Council for Hospitality Management Education, and I'm the Vice Chair. And the purpose of our webinars is to largely really offer some support and expertise on the research methodologies to the current PhD, PGRs, or early career researchers, scholars, but at the same time, we appreciate that many of such topics are of interest to anyone. So we are very happy to have you all here. CHME, just for those of you who are unfamiliar with it, is a non-for-profit making organization. It represents largely UK, some European and international universities and colleges, which offer higher education programs in the fields of hospitality studies, hospitality management, and related fields. And towards the end of this webinar, I will also share with you some details of the upcoming webinars in the new year. So I'm very excited today that we can welcome Dr. Agnieska Rydzik to share with us on visual methodologies. Agnieszka is an associate professor in tourism and work at the University of Lincoln, and her research focuses on employment relations, the future of work, gender, migration, and worker agency. She is interested also in community-based research and visual and participatory methodologies. And actually, I think it's fair to say that a lot of Agnieszka's work actually is creating those more hospitable workplaces, communities, and institutions. And I think it's also very important to say that she has recently received funding through the British Academy Mid-Career Fellowship, where she is exploring technological change and the future of hospitality work. So congratulations again on achieving that. And over to you, Agnieszka.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much, Maria, for the introduction. Lovely to see you all here. So the plan is to kind of introduce you to a range of different methods and approaches to looking at visual methodologies. And so I'll probably talk about an hour or so, and then hopefully we'll have some time for questions. So if you have any questions, please post them in the chat, and I'll probably pick them up towards the end. So once I've kind of gone through the slides, and I do hope that that this talk will encourage you to kind of embed some aspects of visual methodologies in your research, if not in your current projects, maybe in the future. It is a fascinating approach, and what I'm going to do is to tell you a little bit about my PhD journey as well, and tell you about how I embedded them visual methods in my research as well. Okay, so yeah, as I said, post your questions, whatever you kind of or kind of comments on in the chat, and we can take it from there. Okay, so I'm a researcher interested in, as Maria said, in working relations, worker agency, and also migration. So in terms of my research and my PhD research, I was doing it on migrant women from Central and Eastern European countries. So I'm a Polish migrant myself. So when I was doing my research, that was ages ago, back in 2009 when I started, I wanted to do something about migrant women like myself, coming from Eastern European countries, and I wanted to explore their identities and working lives. So I wanted to look at that kind of intersection in terms of, how their working lives affected their kind of private lives, and kind of how they navigated sometimes quite hostile environments, and how they kind of responded to some of it. So when I started doing my research, I was looking for the right methodological approach to use. And it took me a while. I remember spending many hours in a library in Bristol. I was based in Bristol when I was doing my PhD. And and kind of going through the different methodologies that would kind of resonate with me, that would speak to me. And I do remember this moment when I came across the book around participatory approaches and arts-based methodologies. And I thought, well, this is what I really want to do. This really spoke to me. So there was a book that really inspired me, and that kind of was the foundation of a journey that I'll kind of introduce you to a little bit in a moment. So my PhD, as I said, was about researching working lives and lived experiences of migrant women from Central Eastern European countries, so Poland, Slovakia, Czech Republic, Hungary, and so on. These were the countries that joined the EU in 2004. And when I was doing my research in 2005, in the UK media and public discourses, there was a lot of discussion about flooding of, how migrants from Eastern Europe were flooding the UK, and how there were a lot of them, and you would have a lot of articles in the media about the numbers, and about, I don't know, some articles about kind of quite stereotyping migrants. When it came to women, they were often quite kind of sexualized or objectified. When it came to men, it were quite vilified. So I was living through it, and I was seeing how Eastern European migrants were portrayed in the media and the kind of different stereotypical representations. I was also, as a student, I also worked part-time in hospitality. So on a daily basis in work, I would be also kind of sometimes confronted by customers who would be asking me the "where are you from" question very frequently, and they would always say, "Oh, there are so many Polish migrants here," and sometimes it was very nice and friendly, and sometimes it was a little bit hostile. So I really wanted to kind of explore those experiences, the experiences of those women who also had kind of were in a similar situation. So this is the kind of the background and the types of jobs migrant women went into. Of course, it depends on their kind of background and qualifications and so on. But if you look at the statistical data from that time, a lot of migrant women entered the labor market through hospitality jobs, tourism jobs. So a lot of them worked in the sector to kind of start their careers. Often hospitality jobs are perceived as quite attractive for migrants who are newcomers, because they offer that kind of refuge and welcome. So they're quite positive in that sense, but they also can bring some exploitative conditions. So when I was looking for a methodological approach, I was this kind of insider outsider, and I was doing research on a group I knew and I was kind of part of. So I didn't want to just be the researcher who's doing research on a group and the kind of the distant, the withdrawn researcher. I wanted to be my methodology to reflect my positionality as well. I think that's quite important, that kind of reflexivity around who we are. What is the research we want to do? How do we want to approach our participants? How do we see our participants? Are they co-creators of knowledge? Are they our respondents? Or who are they for us? So I really wanted to do something that would kind of reflect my philosophical, I guess, position. And also I did a lot of reading around doing research with groups that are less heard about. So at that time, there was not that much research about Eastern European migrant women. There was not that much discussion about their contribution or their voices. They're mostly reflected in kind of public media discourses and political discussions, rather than really representing themselves. So I wanted them to be part of the research in a way where they could represent their voices as well. That was the kind of the starting point. And I will tell you, so in the end, what I went for, it was arts-based participatory methodology, and I will show you some of the outcomes later on. But before we do this, what I want to go through is to talk a little bit about visual methods, the different types and different approaches to visuals. Okay, so for a long time, researchers researchers who are using visual approaches in their research have been talking about visuals playing an important part in the research process. They can be actually quite valuable and used in research. And I think, and they offer that alternative way of doing research. Okay, So probably there's some things you already know about visual methodologies. And if you think about, if you look at the research done on visuals, there will be some kind of key ideas around it. So what are some of the opportunities? Visuals, visual methodologies can provide richer and deeper understandings of phenomena studied. So it often is about kind of zooming into a phenomena and providing kind of perhaps deeper understandings of participants' perspectives or the phenomena studied. So it's an alternative view of what we are studying, an alternative way of gathering data, and it can be also very multi-layered. So there are different kind of interpretations of what we are researching. Now nowadays, when researchers started using visuals, they needed to, have the equipment, like cameras. When they did it with participants, they had to give participants the cameras. And so nowadays it's very easy and accessible. So the barriers to participations have been significantly reduced. We no longer have to give participants cameras, or because cameras that are easy to use, because they can use their phones. As researchers as well, we have much more skills in terms of producing visuals, in terms of, storing them. It's much easier in terms of management of data as well. Now, visuals can be used not only as the main research method, as the main methods, but also in combination with conventional research methods. So it could be, so you don't need to see them as the only method used, but you can use it, alongside interviews, for example, alongside focus groups. I'll tell you a little bit about how to do that. They can provide a way of engaging and empathizing with participants, and I'll tell you a little bit about how that can happen and the way I've done it in my research. But it is a different way of collaborating with research participants. It also offers a different opportunity for reporting of research. So there, particularly nowadays, we talk a lot about public engagement and impact, but using visual methodologies can really help with reaching wider audiences outside of academia. So many people might not read your PhD thesis or your journal articles, might not have access to them, but they might actually, have a look at your, online showcase of participants' narratives, or they might visit your exhibition. So it's just a different way of reaching audiences, and it can create much more accessible knowledge and different types of knowledge. So how can visuals be used? So they can be used to illustrate phenomena. So sometimes we need, if we're not using visuals, we need a lot of words to describe something. But if you put a photo in there, it can actually replace a lot of words. It can help you understand, can the reader understand what we are talking about. It can also be used for documentation of the research process. So it might not be that you will use visuals you took as a researcher when you were doing field work. You might not use it in your thesis, you might not use it, kind of include in your publications, but it can help you kind of remember things. It can help you document the process. It can help you later on when you're analyzing it to describe things and so on. Visuals can also accompany text, so they can go alongside your narrative. And I have used visuals within my thesis, also within my journal articles, to do that, to complement the narrative I was writing. They can explain something that is difficult to describe using words, can provide alternative multi-layered perspectives and just a slightly different point of view. It can also, which is very important, provoke or elicit other data. And I'll share with you a method that's called photo elicitation or photo driving, where kind of where visuals are used with participants to prompt responses, to encourage them to delve deeper into the stories they want to tell. And it is a great, great tool to encourage participants, talking about their lives and their experiences. And as I mentioned, as a mode of dissemination and public engagement as well. Now, so the first kind of type, I've got 3 types of visual data. The first type, which is quite common, is researcher found visual data. So it's where you as the researcher collect data that is already out there in the public domain. So these could be, I don't know, postcards, it could be brochures, it could be images on websites. It could be kind of, for example, what I did in my kind of one of my chapters of my thesis, I did media analysis, discourse analysis of media representations of Eastern European women. So I collected articles where they featured Eastern European women and images around them. I kind of did analysis of those to show what are the discourses, the dominant discourses. But it could be all sorts of different data out there. And then you as a researcher, you have to demonstrate a systematic approach to collecting that data and then to analyzing it. So it's often around, in tourism and hospitality, it's often around kind of how destinations are represented, the different ways they're kind of constructed, places are constructed, people are represented. And there's some research from Morgan Pritchard, for example, around how different destinations have been constructed in kind of in tourism materials. So sometimes it's around how some destinations have been eroticized through the portrayals of women, or sexualized, or kind of the different kind of how stereotypes filter through to them, to the media representations. So then that's the main kind of, I would say that's quite a popular way. So you analyze films, you analyze different forms of media out there, and you have to show systematic approach. It can also be used, these images can also be used if you do interviews or focus groups to elicit responses, to provoke conversations and things like this. Now, in terms of data analysis, the 2 common ones are either discourse analysis, where you have a smaller sample, but what you look at is at what are the dominant representations, what are the kind of the rhetorics, and also what is missing, what are the absences. And then there's content analysis, which is much more quantitative approach. So discourse analysis is more a qualitative way of looking at images. Often the sample is smaller and more selective. And content analysis is particularly looking at larger sample and looking at how kind of on a larger scale things are manifesting. And I'll give you an example here. But that's one of the types. So researcher found visual data analyzed in various ways, but what you need to show is, why you're looking at this data, how you're systematic in approaching it. So I've used this type in one of my, so I've used it in a chapter of my thesis looking at discourses of media representations of Eastern European women. But I also, what we also did with colleagues was to look at how couples are represented and places as well, and destinations are represented in wedding abroad promotional tourism brochures. So what we did, it was a large sample. We had over 671 images, and we were looking at evolution of how couples were represented in those brochures. So we were very much interested in whether the portrayals changed over time, or whether they were stereotypical, or which kind of social identities were missing as well. So have images becoming more diverse? And some of the arguments were, well, the data showed that people who marry abroad are often older. The stats showed that they often remarry or have second marriages or renewal of vows. The data also showed that we have now more same-sex couples marrying abroad. So we wanted to see whether that was represented in the brochures. And And these were the images we were looking at. So what we looked at is brushes over time, and then we had to code. We had what we call visibility framework, a code book. We used to code for kind of gender stereotypes, gender roles, but also we had categories for disability, for same-sex marriages, for interracial couples and ethnic minority couples. We had for age as well. So we were interested in whether over 16 years, these representations changed over time. So we used content analysis to do that. And it was a useful method, because basically what you did, you coded each image that you found and then looked at the kind of the spread and looked at the changes in evolution. And it was really interesting to find some of them were surprising and some of them weren't so surprising. What we found is that predominantly the images in these tourism brochures for weddings abroad, they were portraying young couples, despite stats actually showing that these couples are much older. They were portraying young, kind of typically kind of attractive couples, slim, heterosexual, very few same-sex couples, and where images of same-sex couples were presented, they were kind of tucked in the corner, very understated. There were very few images of older couples, and if they were still kind of stereotypically, beautiful, and they were often sat down. Most of the images were on the beach, so the destinations weren't really different one from another. So you couldn't distinguish Mexico from Cuba, from other places, because they were all on the beach, very, very stereotypical. So the content analysis helped us show what are the dominant images, who is missing as well. So there were no representations of people with visible disabilities, for example, and things like this. So that's the kind of one of the ways in which you can use researcher found data. And you can both use quantitative analysis and also discourse analysis to look at the ways in which people, places are constructed, represented, what are the dominant discourses, rhetoric used, and so on. Okay, let's move on to the second type of second type of visual data, and that's researcher created data. So it's much less common. But there are some researchers in tourism who have used it. Tiana Rakic, her work is one of the examples. She's used research created visual data, but basically it's you as the researcher going out there and creating visual data. So it could be through video, through photography, and then using it in your analysis, in your research. And it often is within ethnographic approach. So Tiana Rakic used, she's a filmmaker as well. So she created a documentary as well as her thesis. And the documentary was screened in various festivals, and hers was around representation of Acropolis in Athens, and she had lots of footage. So some skills are required. It depends really what you want to do, but it can also be just used for your own purposes, so for fieldwork purposes. So you can document your fieldwork and then use some of it for your analysis. Tiana used this as one of the main methods, and she used filmmaking as her way into this, but it can be other ways as well. But it's an interesting approach. Now, the way I've used it is really just to support my research. So I had a project about women brewers with my colleague Victoria, and it was about women brewers and kind of their collective ways of supporting each other. So they had a women-only group, and they supported each other.
And danke. Oh, das sind ja viele.
And basically, what we did interviews with different women brewers, but we also were invited to some collective brewing kind of events. And when we were at those events, the women, it was kind of observation. So we chatted to the women, but we also observed them at work. So we did take some images to to show some aspects of the work, because they often talked about the physical aspects of the work. They talked about the work as being embodied and requiring physical effort, and they talked about how, as women, they were often talked about in the context of that they're too weak, that they can't do brewing because they can't reach or they can't lift, or they're not strong enough. So a lot of their identity work was around demonstrating the physical abilities, around kind of navigating an industry, a sector that is very male dominated. So what we did, we took some photographs, and when we were publishing a paper out of it around kind of brewers' identity work and their embodied work, we initially included some images in the paper to illustrate some of the physicality of it, and there was a section around the physical aspect. But the reviewers weren't so interested and told us to take them out, which is absolutely fine. But the images we generated still helped us kind of remember, helped us kind of think about the work that they did, and the kind of the narratives that they told us about. So it was quite interesting for us to do it. But in the end, the images didn't make it to the publication. Now, different journals have different approaches. Nowadays, journals are much more open to publishing images, as long as they they have a place there, as long as they're important. In our article, it seems that reviewers and editors decided that it wasn't kind of necessary, that the paper also could stand alone without images, which is a shame, but the images were still useful in terms of documenting the research process and the observations that we did at these brewing events. Okay, now the third type, which I think is the most interesting type, is participant-created visual data. So this is where you engage participants in creating images, and images or visuals. So it could be photographs, it could be that they do drawing, collage, they videos, whatever they think. Sometimes some of the methods are very strictly photo elicitation. Some of them are more around giving participants choice, or doing a different type of materials. But this is very much around participants and their perspectives, and them being the creators, and them taking some control over what they're telling you. And the idea is that in an interview, you get quite, when you have a conversation, you get immediate responses. But when you encourage participants, so for example, before an interview, you will tell them, oh, could you bring with you 5 photos that represent your working life or your, leisure time. They have time to reflect on their experiences. So they have time to think about it, to either take photographs or select the ones they already have. So it's very much around them making some decisions. And then in the interview, which is called photo elicitation interview, those images that they bring to the interview are used to elicit data, to tell stories. So they're used as prompts for further conversation. And often it's a way of helping participants narrate their stories. And it's quite interesting. I once went to a workshop, I think it was in Cambridge, around visuals, and we were asked to bring some free images. And we did, as researchers, we kind of were paired, and then we did like an interview, photo elicitation interview with those images. And I was paired with a person I've never met, but she brought 3 images representing the kind of private life, leisure time, and work life. And within a minute, because images help you delve into the personal relatively easily, within a few minutes, we didn't know each other. We were able to go to quite interesting discussion around the personal, the work and so on. But she decided, it was about what photos she decided to bring, and the photos represented the important parts of her life. So it is very much about facilitating a reflexivity, encouraging participants to take some ownership over what they're going to tell you, It can help elicit some other data in the interview data or focus group data. And researchers say that it's a more balanced way of doing interviews or collecting data, because it encourages a little bit more participants to be a little bit more active, co-create or collaborate with you. And it often is used in feminist and kind of participatory approaches, where it's around, balancing some of the power relations and repositioning participants and their role in the research process. So the methods that are used here, they're either called auto-driving or photo-elicitation. So photo-elicitation interviews, basically, but it is very much about actively engaging participants in the research process. So basically, instead of a standard interview, what you would do, you would encourage participants to create some visuals or bring some visuals. It depends what you're interested in, what your research question is. But then the participants would bring those visuals to the interview, and the discussion will be driven by those images that they brought and the stories that they had. So participants in the interview, what they do, they interpret the data. They tell you the stories. Often images are good at kind of showing those multi-layered meanings, the stories behind them, also what's not there. So you can kind of prompt around and get really, really interesting narratives around it. And it's also enjoyable for participants because they feel a little bit more comfortable in terms of, they're not interrogated. Sometimes interviews are a bit like interrogation, whereas photo-elicitation is more about chatting about the images, the visuals they brought, whatever these are. And they have a little bit more ownership, and it can be, as I said, different materials. Here is just a screenshot of a paper my colleague Therese and Emmanuel, they did about using participant-generated images to explore tourism impacts in Brazil, in one of the places in Brazil. So if you're interested, I would really encourage you to have a look at it. It is a paper that kind of explores this method, its challenges and limitations. There are always some limitations to any method you're using. So it's quite interesting. Kind of it really helps out unpack some of these things. And I will tell you a little bit more about it in a moment in relation to my research as well. We'll talk a little bit about limitations. Now, in my new project, I'm interested in technological change and how it affects tourism work and hospitality workplaces. And I'm going to do interviews with workers in hospitality, but I'm also interested in their own perspective. So I will be encouraging them to bring some images that would represent their relationship to technology, and kind of how they cope and respond, and their kind of views on the growing digitalization of workplaces. So it's really around kind of engaging them to reflect in ways in which I think interviews are requiring a little bit more immediate responses. Visuals enable a little bit more reflective process. And one of the outputs will be an exhibition of some of the images, and also an online showcase of some of the narratives. Because what I wanted is to encourage participants to take photos and then tell me about them in an interview, for me to write up some narratives and then present those narratives kind of as a showcase of voices, worker voices. Now, when we talk about why am I doing this? Now, when we talk about technological change, there was a lot of techno optimism from the kind of the creators of the technology, also from managers, because a lot of the discourses are around saving, efficiency, productivity. And there was a lot of research about that, and a lot of research about the customer perspective. Do customers like robots? Do customers like automatic automation, so automatic check-ins and so on? So a lot of it is either the management or the customer's perspective. So what I'm delving in is to trying to understand, what do workers think about it? What are their perspectives on some of the changes that are happening beyond their control? So workers are not really consulted. They are expected to adapt. So I'm kind of trying to look at some of these adaptation strategies. But so that's kind of photo elicitation. Photo elicitation or auto driving are very kind of typical methods of using participant generated images in eliciting data, narratives and stories and perspective and experiences. Now, it is linked to what I did, but mine was slightly different. So in my PhD, in the end, after all this searching, what I really connected with is a participatory approach. So it's a visual participatory approach. I called it arts-based participatory approach. In the beginning, I did want to do photo elicitation, but I'm using, because all the literature tells you that photos are the easiest way of engaging participants, because participants, it's easy to take photos, bring them in, and they don't need that many skills, and that's the preferred technique by the participants. What I found is actually my participants weren't as keen on images and photos, not all of them anyway, and they wanted to use their own techniques. So they wanted to have choice, and I gave them that choice. So in my arts-based participatory approach, my participants could choose any visuals, any method they wanted that enabled them to tell their story they wanted to tell. Okay, so it is very much about participant-driven approach. So participants create their artworks. It could be images, but it doesn't have to be. It engages them in kind of reflecting and interpreting their lives and their feelings, and kind of aids reflection. And in that approach, in the participatory approach, it's not only the outcome that matters, it's the process. So what do participants go through when on the journey to conceptualizing, thinking about ideas, producing their outputs and so on. So it's not just the output, it's the whole process of reflection, creation, production. Now, often when it's used in projects, it's used with help with artists who then run workshops for participants. When I was doing my PhD, I didn't have any funding, but I really wanted to use participatory approach because I didn't feel, as an insider in the group, I didn't really feel that I wanted that kind of power relations, me doing research on them. I wanted to do research with them, and in a way for them as well. So I didn't have any artists, but I kind of tried to adapt the techniques or the process that is normally used through kind of group workshops. Now that didn't work either, because basically my participants, they were all very busy women. They worked, they studied, they had, busy lives. So it was quite difficult to get them in one room at the same time. It was very, very busy. If they worked in hospitality, they worked different shifts, different hours, all sorts of different, times and places. So it was impossible. So I had to adapt. And in the end, I did 1 or 2 focus groups with a group, but then I adopted an individual approach where I met with individual participants to talk about what they wanted to do, help them develop their ideas, or, just be there if they had any questions or weren't sure about things. And it actually worked out quite well because, some were more confident than others. Some considered themselves more creative than others. Some said, oh, I'm not an artist. I don't know if I can do it. And in the end, they went on a journey of actually doing it. So learning a lot. So not having group workshops actually and didn't create that competition or comparison between the different participants. Now, it can be followed by an exhibition of participant-created artworks, and I did that, and I'll show you some images from the exhibition. But the point of adopting this methodology was that I wanted to do research that would bring the stories and the voices of those women those Eastern European migrant women who worked in hospitality to the public domain, but also so that they're not just talked about in the media or the political discourse. They were not just visible in the workplaces, serving customers, but also they were invisible. They were kind of in the public space in their own right, as their own persons with their own stories and identities they wanted to share. So that they wanted, and that was their main motivation. Their motivation to take part in my research was that they wanted to tell stories. They often talked about that they wanted to challenge the stereotypes, that they wanted to show their lives outside of work, that they wanted to challenge some stereotypical representations of Eastern European women in the discourses at that time. So we decided very early on that we would have an exhibition of their artworks in public space to give them an opportunity to share their stories. But really, it is about that kind of way of, giving participants opportunities to showcase their stories. It is also quite complicated and difficult, but it's what can be done. Okay, so now what did I do? So I had several phases. The recruitment of participants wasn't that difficult. I was based in Bristol, and it was quite easy to recruit women because I had the idea of an exhibition in my head straight away, and they really liked that. They really wanted to, do something to share their own stories and their lives and their stories of migration work with the community. So they had that motivation. So the motivation was not only just taking part in my research. The motivation was to engage with the community, with the local community. So I did have initially kind of some meetings and initial focus group to have a discussion around it and in terms of what they wanted to do. And then I had a series of individual meetings, as I mentioned, and they worked on their artworks individually. Now, one of the challenges was that we had a date for the exhibition quite early on because I knew about a community event taking place in Bristol. It was arts community trail, something like this. What it was is basically in Bristol, in one of the areas, every year they had a community arts trail where people opened their homes and the community centres and exhibited work. Their own work or other groups, community kind of groups work. So I wanted us to be part of that community event, for us to connect to the neighborhood voices, neighborhood representations of people, to kind of showcase and give visibility. It was often about visibility to women from Central Eastern European countries who were living in Bristol. So in the meantime, as women worked on their artworks, I also interviewed them. I did unstructured interviews with them about their experiences of life and work in Britain. And then when the artworks were ready, and most of them were ready kind of the day before the exhibition, and up until the day before the exhibition, I didn't really know how many participants are going to create the artworks. There was a lot of risk and trust involved in that process. So it's quite a stress, I have to say, it was quite stressful because, participants, they were doing it voluntary. So if they didn't create the artworks or if they withdrew, that was okay as well, because, that I couldn't make them participate. But because we had an exhibition, we had a kind of vibe around it, I think they all, in the end, produced the artworks. So before the exhibition, I had a photo elicitation interview with every participant, and then we had the exhibition. We did some promotion of it. We had some posters I'll show you about in a bit. We had the actual exhibition, and then there was we had another exhibition later on. So in terms of the participants, I had 11 participants overall. So it was a small qualitative in-depth study with a lot of ways of gathering data. And it was all about rich data. So it wasn't about generalizing. It wasn't about representativeness. It was about visibility and experience, giving voice to Eastern European women in representing their stories in the ways they wanted. So projects like this are necessarily small because that's what you want, really. 8 participants created artworks, and 3 they decided early on that they weren't confident enough to create an artwork, but they still wanted to be part of the project, and they still wanted to be interviewed, and they came to the exhibition and so on. So I gave them that opportunity to be part of the project. So there was a lot of different data, and visual data was part of that. Was very much kind of at the core of it. Now, when I was writing up, I did analysis of the different narratives and the interview data, but what I decided to do as well, because often voices get fragmented when we write it up, what I decided to do is for the 8 participants who created artworks, I had 8 little chapters sprinkled around in my thesis, kind of with the artwork and with a narrative from the participants about the artwork. So little chapters, they can't be called really chapters, but little sections attached to the analysis chapters that would feature the artwork and the story of the participant, as well as, you know, the overall analysis. And that worked quite well because it kind of gave this uninterrupted, unfragmented narrative and gave that voice to the participants. That was quite interesting. Now, in terms of some of the examples, so this is an example of artwork from Lydia. Lydia, what she did, she projected a map of kind of Bristol and surrounding areas, and she called her artwork as postcards to her family, postcard to my family, and she created 6 postcards. Used kind of Photoshop. She learned how to use Photoshop for this project, printed the postcards, and what she did is like a map of her mobility in the region. And she talked about her kind of the mobility itself, so moving from A to B, and how she started and where she is now. But also it was very much a metaphorical journey of development and growth and belonging and finding oneself in a new country, because she arrived to the UK when she was very young. So what she did, she kind of mapped her mobility, but also her kind of, the journey of growth and learning. And so each postcard kind of represented a different stage of her life. So that was one of the artworks. So you see, so that she kind of conceptualized it. And then in the interview, she told me about, she brought the postcards, and she told me about each of the postcards, story of each of the postcards. So basically the interview was structured around those 6 critical points of her life, and some of the kind of the challenges she might have faced, some of the obstacles. So the first postcard is the one on the right-hand side with her face kind of shaded. And she talked about it as quite dark time because she was out in a rural hotel, quite isolated. But then the final postcard is all about very positive, and she talks about her transformation as a person, the confidence she developed, and so on. So, you know, what you see. And so when we exhibited the artworks, each participant also wrote a kind of like a little, not description, but a kind of like a snapshot of what they wanted to kind of introduction to the artwork. So that kind of accompanied each artwork. Now this second one is from Natalia, who also took that idea around migration journey. But what she did, she took this supplement to a newspaper, and within that supplement, she pasted images she chose and created, and kind of little snapshots of her story. So when you flip through the paper, you could read about her story, her journey, to kind of, she talked about her as kind of, you know, journey to adulthood and motherhood, and also her work kind of was intertwined within these live experiences. So that was her kind of story. So the visitors to the exhibition could flip through and read about the stories. Now, I have to say that the participants, I think apart from 2 kind of relocated, I think before, they were all at the exhibition. And they were all kind of involved in promotion. They invited their friends, their family, and any people from the streets could come in. So it was basically a 2-day event where, you know, you open your homes in that area, West Bristol, and people can come in basically. And we had our own poster, and we were part of that. The blue image is the kind of like a map they had of different places. So as the visitor, you could have a map, open a map, and you could see our place and other places on the map, and you could just pop in anytime you wanted between the opening times, within the opening time. So we had overall over 200 visitors. We had a visitor book with some reflections, but really the aim was to showcase stories of Eastern European women who were kind of new to Bristol and were facing all sorts of different challenges in their lives and workplaces, and they felt, stereotyped. So it was all about visibility and challenging some of the stereotypes. And we also had another exhibition in Cardiff during a conference. So this is how it looked like. The artworks were kind of spread within the spaces, and each artwork had a bit of a description about it, and you could kind of come in and have a look at 8 of them and interact. So the participants were there interacting with each other. Some of them met before in the focus group, some of them never met. So they were also curious about what other participants created. They were curious about what everyone showcased, and we had different sorts of different techniques used. We had glass artworks, we had poetry, we had photos, we had collage, we had a painting. I also decided later on, quite late in the process, that I needed to create one as well. So I decided to join participants in that kind of journey of reflection, and I had my own artwork. The reason I did it is because I felt that, otherwise I'm just the observer, and probably what I wanted is being part of the process. So I felt anxiety about it as well, and we all talked about in the interviews, like being artist, not non-artist. So it was challenging those kind of assumptions about who is an artist, what does it mean to be an artist, that everyone can be creative. So I did it as well, just to join participants on that journey, so that they don't feel that I'm just kind of like an outsider looking in, but that I also kind of went through the stresses of it, and brainstorming ideas and so on and so on. And these are some photos from the actual exhibition days. And some quotes from the visitors who talked about their kind of impressions. But what was interesting is that, a lot of them said, well, I didn't know that, migrant women felt this way, or it's really, really interesting. And, so it was very, very kind of, I think, provocative for the visitors. They were challenged in some ways, but also they learned a lot about the women who lived in the same neighborhood often, or in the neighborhood nearby. I'm happy to tell you more if you have any questions about this, but what I did, it was one of my first papers, was to I really wanted to have a methodological paper that would kind of reflect the whole approach I took and reflect on the process of creation, of kind of going on that journey. So I did have a paper in the Annals of Tourism Research, 2013, quite early on, where I reflected. I think it was when I was writing my methodological chapter and reflecting on all the things. But what I did also, when I did photo elicitation interviews, with women about their artworks, I also asked some questions about how they felt about the whole process. Was it very stressful? Did they nearly give up? What they learned through it? Was it worth it? So we kind of had that discussion about their reflections of, reflecting on the challenge, because it is quite challenging, also to find time. So the paper, you can have a look at it as well if you're interested in the specific approach. But the paper is really reflecting on the process, on some of the benefits for participants, for the audiences, for the researcher, like myself, and some of the stresses of it, some of the anxieties of it, in terms of the risks involved. And I remember at my PhD viva, the external examiner said, I think he started the whole kind of the viva saying, well, I wanted to congratulate you and your supervisors for taking the risks to adopt an approach like this that definitely had challenges but brought incredible outcomes as well. So yeah, it was, I guess yeah, I was very enthusiastic about it, and I just went for it. And I had good supervisors who are co-authors here, and they were really good at embracing my ideas. They just said, well, go ahead with it. You know, so they trusted me, and I trusted my participants. So there's a lot of trust involved in kind of mitigating some of the risks. But I am very grateful for them for kind of not telling me this is too crazy, too out there, or too difficult to do, but really encouraging me to do the research and the methodology I wanted to do. So go beyond the conventional, basically, kind of, you know, go a little bit more, yeah, left field. But it was stressful, I have to say, but it was also wonderful. And you know, the privilege of being a PhD researcher is that I did have more time, and since then as an academic, I don't have the time I used to have to dedicate to a project like this, although I want to go back to the visual a little bit more. Some kind of reflections and tips maybe, and if you have any specific questions, I'm happy to share. But I think, you know, not every project is suitable for visuals. So it does need to be a project. So if you are using visuals, you kind of have to be clear about why you're using them. What is the vision that you have? Are they just there to document the process? Are they just there to, you know, to kind of help you remember, help you kind of describe things? Or are they there as core, integral, and is that the way you want to engage participants? And do you have a research question that can be explored in that kind of visual way? And you know, and is that the main research methods, or maybe that's just one of a few that you can then combine that accompanies other research questions, other research methods. Now, I think my main tip is about having to be flexible and listen to participants' needs and ideas. I think that's what I learned, because I've read so much about this approach before I started my my field work, that I had those fixed ideas about, you know, doing focus groups and doing photo elicitation and using images because they're the easiest, or doing focus groups because that's where they kind of glue and communities formed. That when I started, I was a bit thrown by, you know, that my participants didn't want to do only photos, they wanted to do their own things. And I was a bit thrown that I couldn't really schedule focus groups and workshops as a group. So I had to really adapt and constantly reflect on some of the things and accept the uncertainty. So I had to accept that, you know, if participants don't create their artworks, that's also okay. I can just reflect on that, and I have interview data, so it's not you know, so it's not a big problem if it doesn't work out. So I had to take those risks that you know, I think in the end, really, we all went on a learning journey. And I do have a PhD student who is currently adopting my methodology. So she's using my paper to shape her methodology, and she's doing it on young migrants and their kind of social capital and access to labor markets, and refugees, young refugees, and the kind of access to labor market. And she had learned a lot, you know, that it's not as straightforward, that I had different challenges. So I didn't have challenges of recruitment, for example. She did have challenges with recruiting participants. She also had to be a very, very flexible and so on. So I think this kind of change adaptation, and we had those conversations about anxiety with her and about anticipation and our own expectations and our assumptions, and how we have to kind of give up on some of these and maybe follow participants and what they want to do and what their kind of ideas are. So it's very much that kind of conversation, ongoing conversation. And we have to accept that our priorities are not necessarily participants' priorities. So participants move on with their lives. You know, the project is just one little thing in a busy life that they lead. They have a lot of different challenges, change of jobs, studies, you know, whatever they do, family life. So we kind of have to understand that our researchers might not, is our life and our priority, and we live it and breathe it, and, you know, it's the most important thing for us. But for them, it, you know, it's not. It's just the thing they do for a period of time. And I remember having a call with one of my participants a year or two after the project, after the exhibition. And I was telling her, oh, I'm writing up and my PhD and thanking her. And she said, oh, you're still doing this. I've moved on, I'm doing ABC. And I said, well, indeed, it's still part of my life, but, they've all moved on. They all have lives, and that's okay to acknowledge. Now, data analysis is not easy because you kind of need to figure out how to, if it's participant-driven, participant-created visuals, how do we represent their voices, their stories? How do we embed the visuals? So I decided to have little snapshots of all the 8 artworks because I didn't want to fragment the stories. But, in publications, it's different because it is fragmented, and you kind of still have to think, how do you then, represent? So how are we doing that? How are we coding? So often researchers use thematic data analysis when they analyze visuals, images, so they code them and thematically organize them. So there are different ways of doing this. But what it is really is thinking about the how, what works for your project, and being systematic and being transparent. I think a lot of it is around reflexivity and transparency and the challenges. So in my PhD, I think I have a whole chapter about the kind of the advantages and limitations and challenges of the methodological approach. I really took it all the way. And one of the things is, of course, ethical dimensions, and how do we do research, visual research that is ethical in an ethical way that respects participants' decisions and stories and all these different aspects. And we go through research ethics in our institutions, so we need to show that we can do it in an ethical way, that we can assure anonymity, confidentiality, or if it's not possible to assure confidentiality, we gain consent and have a conversation with participants. So that's really important. There, I have included in the references some guidelines about following kind of ethical guidelines and how to do it in an ethical way. So it shouldn't discourage you, because every research has ethical, dilemma that we need to work through. And in every research, we need to show that we are reflexive, ethical researchers and that we follow guidelines. So really, with visuals, it's more about, reflecting how to do it in an ethical way while still doing visual research. And it is possible as researchers across different disciplines in migration, youth studies, education have used visuals and they figure it out. So it's really, there's a lot of resources out there to support you put a case forward. What was important for me is that it's important to engage audiences beyond academia. So it's not just about our thesis, our research and our publications, but also what do we give back? What do we want to do? What do we want the audiences or local communities to learn about some of the challenges our participants are facing, for example? So, again, it goes back to our aims and objectives. But I think with visuals, that offers that opportunity to engage participants beyond academia and with different stakeholders. Now, some of the limitations, I just only have a few slides now, and then if you can start posting questions if you have any. But of course, like with any method, there are some limitations. Now, the use is still, particularly participatory methodology, is still marginal, mainly because maybe it's very time-consuming and quite risky. But it does not mean that people don't do it. So there are lots of resources out there, although research books, when you look at textbooks, they don't have that many chapters about visual methods, but there would be resources specifically dedicated to visuals. So Tiana Rakic and Donna Chambers had a book about visuals in tourism, but then there'll be different articles like mine reflecting of methodological challenges. However, it is sad that research methods books still don't really acknowledge it as a method that is important. Now, training is often limited. So there's not that many opportunities. I did go to a workshop in Cambridge, I mentioned, but it was after my PhD, so I mostly read about it and kind of did it by, trying and failing in some ways and just finding my own way into it. It's not suitable for every research project. So it's really about connecting what you want to do. What is the research project? Is it suitable? Is it possible to do? And I mentioned reflexivity and rigor are really important. So it's all about transparency, justifying, thinking through some of the challenges. And what I found actually is that, in other conventional research approaches, you don't need to. Now I've published on other approaches, you don't really need to justify your approach. But when you use visuals, you have to justify it a little bit more, that you're asking more questions about it, which is absolutely fine. But yeah, I think because it's more maybe novel, more innovative, reviewers particularly have more questions than when you just do interviews or quant surveys. So really acknowledgement of limitations and acknowledgement of the ethical choices. And the ethical choices will be different for every research project. So it's more about reflecting what matters, what is important. So in terms of the ethics, we embrace kind of, the principles for qualitative research, but we put more effort into kind of assuring, gaining informed consent at different stages. And it's very much about conversations with participants in terms of what they want and what they don't want. But every project is different. Context is important and how sensitive it is. So for example, with my participants, what I did, I asked them for the thesis and publications, how do they want to be represented? So they said they wanted the images to be there, so they gave consent to that, and they wanted their first names to be represented. So they didn't want pseudonyms, they wanted first names, and one participant wanted an initial of her first name. So that was how they chose. But for the exhibition, they wanted the full names to be there. Okay, and now there was a discussion about, with the discussion with the discussions in the literature about how can we, about the kind of the wanting to be represented, wanting to be heard, wanting to be seen. So, the assumption is all participants want anonymity, but actually the reality is a little bit more complex. Not all participants want anonymity if they want to represent something that is important for them. But as a researcher, we have the responsibility to make sure that if they put their stories out there, is there any harm, potential harm, or potential risk of harm? So we need to also inform them of potential risks and so on. So yeah, assuring confidentiality anonymity can be problematic. So we can't assume everyone wants to be anonymous. I think it's a little bit now much more problematized in the literature, and there are ways in which we can do it. But not all participants want their faces to be blurred, for example. They might feel that you're removing them from their work. So it's very important to ask questions and seek consent. But it's very much around also thinking around what your participants want, what is your project about, what are some of the ethical choices you need to reflect on, how do you go about addressing these, and having honest conversations with participants. So some researchers, they talk about staged consent, for example, gaining consent at different stages, or gaining consent for some images and not others, so it's having that conversation. So it's just really protecting the participants. And I've put some references in here. There's some around, for example, the Glow et al. Is the third one, is detailing their analysis stage. So for example, of how they did thematic data analysis. There's some about different methods and methodologies, and there's some about the guidelines. And the Tremlet, I highlighted it in bold. It's a useful guide for ethical research, and it kind of can send you to different guidelines from different organizations. But that's just kind of like as a way of introducing you to the different ways of doing visual research. And I hope that was useful, and hopefully some of you are already using visual research, and some of you maybe want to do it, maybe if not now, maybe in the future. So do get in touch if you have any questions. Thank you so much.
Very much for such a helpful and insightful presentation, and also your willingness to really share your own experiences of using those different visual methods and methodologies, I guess, as well, in conducting your own research. I think that always brings things to life. So thank you very much for that. Before we move on to questions, and I can already see some popping up in the chat, which is wonderful. I just wanted to share with you all. I think you might be one of the first audiences to see. It's on the screen now. Our next upcoming webinars. So there is a 2-part webinar on research paradigms, and really to get the most out of the expertise from Professor Richard Robinson, please consider signing up to both, because they will be they are linked. So it's 31st of January and then 7th of February. I will pop in the link in the chat if you would like to sign up. But like with this one, there will also be communication through LinkedIn and other media. So please do join in. And I really look forward to hearing from Richard about the research paradigms. It's something that I know some of our students sometimes find a little bit tricky to get their heads around, and I know that he's excellent at delivering that. So please do join us for that. I'm going to now stop the recording so we can move on to some questions and answers. But Agnieszka, once again, on behalf of the CHME Executive Committee and myself, I guess as well, many thanks for giving us your time today and for delivering such an insightful presentation. Thank you.